Welcome to a special joint episode of NYSAC's County Conversations and NYAOT's Talk of the Towns podcasts. My name is Mark LaVigne and I am the Deputy Director of the New York State Association of Counties. I am joined today by the three Executive Directors of New York's statewide municipal associations. Stephen Acquario from the New York State Association of Counties, Barb Van Epps from the New York Conference of Mayors, and Chris Koetzle from the New York Association of Towns. Between these three organizations, every level of local government in New York is represented: counties, cities, towns, and villages. While there are important differences among our local governments, there are also many shared challenges and priorities. With the 2026 legislative session kicking into high gear, last week with the State of the State and this week with the governor's proposed state budget, we've gathered today to discuss the collective and individual issues these associations and our members are most concerned about. Local leaders across the state are under real pressure right now, from rising costs to aging infrastructure to persistent workforce shortages, and these challenges are not abstract. They are showing up in our budgets and in the services residents rely on every day. Barb, Chris, Steve, thank you very much for being with us today.
Our pleasure.
We're going to start out with AIM and County Infrastructure Grant Program. The executive budget is set to be released shortly, and let's start with the shared funding priorities, beginning with AIM, the Aid and Incentives for Municipalities. This is one of those funding streams people often hear about, but don't always understand. Barb, can you talk a little bit about why AIM is so important to cities, towns, and villages, and how it differs from the $50 million in temporary municipal assistance the state has added over the last 2 years?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And I just want to thank both of you for having me join you today. I really appreciate your friendship, your counsel, all that we are doing together, because I really do think we are stronger together, and I think our members appreciate all that we do for them here at the state level. But let's talk about AIM funding. So you're right, a lot of people do not understand AIM funding because it really stems from the revenue sharing program that was created by New York State back in the 70s. It has morphed over time into AIM. The thing about AIM, it's the only form of unrestricted aid that cities, towns, and villages get from the state. We have very limited non-property tax sources of revenue available to us, which is why we are so heavily reliant on the property tax. So anytime we receive unrestricted aid from the state, it translates into property tax relief. Unfortunately, AIM was at $715 million for 15 years. So it wasn't growing with inflation. It wasn't growing with the cost of services that were going up considerably. So that was the problem in the first instance. We finally, 2 years ago, were able to get an increase in AIM funding, but they refer to it as temporary municipal assistance. So it's not part of the AIM program currently, and it's clearly meant to be temporary, and that's concerning to us. So that $50 million, we need that money. We want that money to continue to grow. But the word temporary in there makes it challenging for our members because they can't bank on that money being there in the budget that's going to be announced today and the budget that we're going to see next year. So what we are looking for is for the state to recognize that we need AIM revenue. We need it to grow at the rate of inflation or tie it to some other growth factor. But we need to get that temporary municipal aid to become permanent. We need it all bundled into AIM or whatever it is they want to call it, and continue to give municipalities the unrestricted aid that they need.
Great, thanks. Chris, when AIM funding stays flat over time, as it has, how does that actually show up in communities? What are the residents experiencing on the ground?
Well, I think it's, first again, let me thank you for allowing me to be here, Steve. Excellent podcast you guys produce all the time, so thank you very much. Barb, always great to be with you as well. It's a classic case, I think, of having to do more with less, right? So it's like an investment you make that doesn't keep up with inflation. Barb just talked about how AIM hasn't kept up with inflation. Well, then you're really losing money. And so when you think about how that translates into a local government, one or two things is happening. Either you are going to lose services because you just simply can't pay for them, critical services that you were counting on, or it's going to, as Barb mentioned, end up in a levy increase because you have to make that up somewhere. So you either have a choice of trying to bring more money in to make up for it, or cut services because you don't have it. And so it does impact every New Yorker across the state, whether it's town, city, county, village, whatever the local government is. It is something that shows up, and it actually hurts daily, because you think about the services that local governments provide. They're daily, vital, critical services that every New Yorker relies on. And so when you lose that, or you're not keeping up with inflation, it certainly hurts. And we can talk a little bit of how that shows up in CHIPS. I know that's something that we're going to talk about also in the budget a little bit later on.
Great, thank you. Stephen, counties don't receive AIM, but they do rely on a new county infrastructure grant program, or what we have dubbed the County Partnership Program. Can you explain how that program works, and particularly how the 50% local match requirements affect counties, especially smaller and rural ones?
Thank you, Mark, and it's a pleasure to be here with two of my favorite people, our partners in local government. We represent all the local governments, and I just thoroughly enjoy working with Barb and Chris and representing local governments all across this great state. I think the having us here together demonstrates a unity, a unified approach here, representing all of the local governments, 1,600 and some odd local governments in New York State, and working with the state. We are the workhorse level of government. We are the closest level of government to the people, and the discussion you'll hear today will reflect that. For counties, and what really we have been talking about is revenue sharing. This is a equitable thing for the state to do. The state should share revenue with local governments. It used to share a lot of revenue with local governments for towns, cities, villages, and counties. And what we're talking about today is the modern evolution of that revenue sharing, AIM. We need more of it. The state should be providing more AIM to local governments. In counties, in the case of counties, we got thrown out of the program. And what's left of it now is this county infrastructure program. Very grateful for it. It has a matching component, which does stretch local governments' budgets. Counties have to come up with a matching dollar amount to compete for this county infrastructure program, but we need it. It's a new program. It's in its second year. As Barb mentioned, it's a temporary type of program, which really should be a permanent program. And as Barb mentioned, the $50 million in temporary municipal assistance should certainly be a permanent revenue stream to towns, cities, and villages. So too should this county infrastructure program. We're using it for housing development, for wastewater connections into housing units, and that is a priority of the state.
Great, thank you. All three of our organizations are also advocating for the Safe Water Action Program, SWAP, which would provide dedicated formula-based funding for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. Barb, the state already funds the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. What makes SWAP different, and why is it needed in addition to the existing program?
Thank you, Mark. What makes SWAP different is, when you think about it, the Clean Water Infrastructure Act is primarily grant funding. So that money doesn't go to everyone. People have to compete for it. There are winners and losers. I hate to steal Chris's line, but no one should have to compete for clean water. And that's what it boils down to. A lot of our smaller municipalities do not have the capacity to even apply for these grants, because there are hoops you have to jump through. There's money you need to spend. The difference with SWAP is that SWAP would be a dedicated funding stream that would go to every municipality that has a public water or sewer system, which would help them with preventive maintenance, which would help them with those small-scale capital projects to extend the useful life of their systems, so that they can avoid the catastrophes that often result that then they need to apply for that grant funding. We see this as a supplement to the grant funding, not a replacement for the grant funding. We want the grant funding to continue. We see this as a complement to that current system. It will allow municipalities to plan better. It would allow them to avoid those catastrophic events that occur. And think about it, everyone's dealing with PFAS, everyone's dealing with lead pipes, all of the things that are now people are focusing on when it comes to clean water. Every municipality should have the opportunity to get some funding to address these issues.
Stephen, what are you hearing from counties about water and sewer infrastructure right now? How urgent is this need?
Well, I couldn't echo what Barb said. More importantly, she just hit it right on the head. Nobody should have to compete for clean water. And there's a reason why the state has invested billions into clean water systems. And Governor Hochul has been a champion of doing that. State legislature's been a champion of doing that, addressing emerging contaminants. As Barb mentioned, this is the most important issue of our day, clean water. And so the swap ask, very important for the governor, the legislature to realize every day across this state, there's a water main break. I'm living one right now in the town of Colony. We have a boil advisory in effect right now. I can't drink our water. The town working every single minute, round the clock, through the night, to address that water main break, a massive water main break. This is happening all across the state. We need additional assistance. The state and its grant program through EFC, DEC does a masterful job of distributing these grants, and it's very important. But this, as Barb mentioned, is a supplement. We need it. We've been advocating for it for a few years, so I hope we get some attention this year.
Great. In addition to water infrastructure, local governments are also on the front lines of maintaining New York's roads. Counties, cities, towns, and villages are responsible for most of the roadway miles in the state, which makes transportation funding a core local government issue. Chris, can you explain what CHIPS is and why it's so important for local governments today?
Well, CHIPS is what SWAP is modeled on, and Barb kind of went through that. So CHIPS is a formula-based funding program that provides funds to the local governments to invest in making sure roads are paved, and there's a variety of programs, potholes, and extreme winter, and all these other things. But CHIPS primarily is, in many cases for towns anyway, the only money that towns are able to put into annual paving plans. In fact, I just came from a breakfast with a town that was lamenting the fact that they seem to be, they said they seem to be realizing that they're paving less and less each year, and people are getting pretty upset about it. And of course, found out that CHIPS is their main, focus on that. And what that means is what we talked about earlier with inflation. You can't continue to fund something at this level while the cost of that aggregate is going like this. That delta spread is fewer roads being paved. And the thing about local roads, whether it be a county road, a city, village, or town road, vast majority of the number of miles are local government controlled roads. But I was talking to a legislator about how important the thruway is, and the thruway is very important. But guess what? Without a local road, you're not getting to a state road. Everybody has to be on a local road to get somewhere. And so, an investment in CHIPS is an investment in the state's infrastructure. And I say it all the time, CHIPS really promotes economic development because you can't have that without roads. It promotes public safety because you can't have that without roads. And so, again, we're looking to hopefully try to encourage more revenue share through the CHIPS program so that we can pave more local roads and build that infrastructure New York needs to move forward.
Mark, if I could just add on that, as Chris mentioned, the cost of fuel, the cost of the material that's used, this asphalt, that goes up and up and up each year. And the funding level stays relatively flat. We need these programs to have an escalator built right into it, so it's growing as the cost of supplies are growing as well. Look, our children are on these roads as well. School buses ride on these roads. The size of the vehicles these days, some of these trucks are the equivalent of 6,000 cars driving on the road with some of these heavy equipment, big trucks, large trucks driving on these roads. We have to maintain them, and we need these funds to grow.
Well, the e-buses heavier.
Yeah.
And they're really chewing up the roads, what we're hearing from our local superintendents.
Yeah, so it's just state of the modern era here.
Great, thank you. So these things are funding issues that we've talked about so far. But funding isn't the only thing that municipal associations are working on. All three associations are also focused on modernizing how local governments operate. One common priority between the three associations is updating New York's public notice requirements and competitive bidding thresholds. Chris, you've written op-eds calling New York's public notice requirements outdated. What hasn't kept up with reality, and what should the state be doing differently?
Yeah, this is a little known mandate, but actually it has a big impact on local governments. And as town supervisor, for 15 years, I saw this where we would have to put public notices into newspapers. I saw what the cost of that was, 6 figures in some towns. We estimate there's about a $6 to $8 million impact on local governments for having to require them to put a public notice into the newspaper. The problem now is you look, I don't have to go through all this because everybody knows this already. People aren't reading newspapers the way they used to at the level they used to read. They're getting their information online. We got the .gov mandate that came down last year that requires local governments to have a .gov and put their public notices online. You know, when I was supervisor, we had a listserv at the town of Glenville that actually had more subscribers to the listserv than the Gazette had in the town. So it seems silly to me that the public notice should go into the newspaper when we actually hit more people with our online tools. And, you know, you think about what that costs. It's very, very expensive. And I'll give you 2 examples that recently, you know, kind of drives this home. Number one, someone I know was looking for a job recently, and I'm an old guy. So I'm always like, what jobs are in the paper? And they looked at me like, in the paper? What are you talking about? There hasn't been jobs listed in the paper in years. And, you know, you think about that. The private sector's already moved beyond, and everything's online for job searches now. No jobs in the paper because it's too expensive. And then sadly, the second instance was my wife and I are pre-planning my in-laws' funerals for them, you know, as we get towards this part of life. And the undertaker looked at us and said, you know, the obituary, have you thought about just doing it online? Because he said nobody does an online or an in-paper obituary anymore. Do you know how expensive that is? And so, you know, the private sector is moving beyond. These are the things you have to think about.
Gosh.
Yes. But everybody else is moving on, but towns and other local governments are stuck having to continue to pay inefficient. And one last thing I'll say on it. It's not good for the resident either, because the resident is charged twice. The resident has to pay through their taxes for us to put the notice into the paper, and then they have to go buy the paper to read it. And that's just inefficient. It just doesn't work. You know, it doesn't, the paper lasts for the day, and then it gets thrown away, and people don't read it again. It should live online. We have our .gov mandate. Let's get efficient. Let's let towns and local governments get efficient and move into this century.
Barb, there's also the issue of competitive bidding thresholds. Can you explain what these thresholds are, why the current ones are a problem, and how they affect day-to-day municipal operations?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I feel like there's a recurring theme here, and that has all to do with like adjusting for inflation and moving into the times, because the competitive bidding thresholds, which dictate when local governments have to competitively bid either with the purchase of goods and services or their public works. Goods and services is currently at $20,000. Public works is currently at $35,000. And any time a municipal government goes above those thresholds, they have to go through the competitive bidding process. And that's advertising, that's legal notices, that's sealed bids. There's a lot that goes into that. And the goals for competitive bidding are laudable. It's about transparency, it's about fair pricing, it's about accountability. But raising those thresholds, which have not been raised since 2010, doesn't mean that those goals cannot be met. It's just a matter of adjusting for the costs of everything that have gone up, because now even your smallest, most modest purchases, you need to go through that process, and it results in inefficiencies, it results in delays, it results in extra staff time, and that wasn't the intent of the law at this point. The intent is that these limits would be adjusted as as the cost of everything else rose. And so that's what we're looking for, an increase in these limits so that local governments can behave more efficiently and do what they need to do to get the job done.
Great. Now let's move on to workforce shortages and retiree earning caps. Let's shift the conversation. Workforce shortages are something we're hearing about everywhere right now. All three organizations also support increasing the earnings cap for retirees who want to return to public service. You don't usually think of retirees when you think about workforce development. Stephen, why has the retiree earnings cap become such a pressing issue for local governments, and why are retirees such a valuable workforce resource right now?
Well, all three associations and our members are trying to do more with less in their respective local governments. We work for the taxpayer. We have to keep our taxes low, and we have to run efficient programs. We have been experiencing, over the last several years, a massive brain drain of retirements. Coming out of COVID, the county saw a tremendous amount of public health officials leaving government service, as well as many other areas of local government retiring. Just how the workforce is shaped today. People are leaving. It's time for them to enjoy the next chapter of their life. So local governments are struggling with bringing in recruitment efforts. Chris has spent a lot of time on workforce development. One of his priorities when he came in to office here at the association level, trying to focus on the development and recruitment of the next generation of our workers. It's a very difficult thing to do. We're working with the State University of New York on an internship program for all levels of local government and help bring young people in through colleges and elsewhere into local government. It's a wonderful area of employment. The retirees have the knowledge. They can be brought back in at a much lower salary, much lower benefits, and a greater, more efficient workforce. They want to come back. Most people don't want to not work. They want to continue working. We've asked the state to raise that level that they could earn while collecting a pension. It got a lot of attention last year by the state legislature. Let's hope they take a look at it this year.
Where is it now, and where do we want it to be, Steve?
I believe it's 30,000 right now, and we would like to see that double to 60,000 or 50,000, somewhere in that range.
Great, thank you. Finally, NYAOT, NYCOM, and NYSAC are all asking for the state to create a statewide grant clearinghouse. Barb, can you explain a little bit about what this is and what problem would it solve? What's wrong with the way cities, villages, and towns and counties currently learn about grant programs?
This is one proposal that I am very excited about because I feel like if there's ever been low-hanging fruit, this might be it. So currently, how municipalities find out about grant programs, that's anyone's question, because sometimes it's social media, sometimes it's a website, sometimes it's through the associations. But the problem is there are 25, 30 agencies that all have their own grants, all have their own deadlines, all have their own requirements, and there is no one place that I can go, you can go, or a local official can go to find out what's out there, what's available to them, whether it be for their parks, their water system, their roads, their volunteer fire companies, whatever it is. There is no one-stop shop where they can get this information and have it all in front of them, updated in real time, monitored. And we think this is something that the state can do. We think it would be very low cost. We think the return on investment would be significant, because not only would municipalities be able to find out about these grants, but the money would be going out the door and would be spent on things that it was intended to be spent on. So we just see this as a win-win for everyone, very low cost, and something that will benefit all of our members.
Chris, do you see an issue here with the grants?
Yes. It definitely, as Barb talked about, they're hard to source. Very often, at least in towns, you don't have folks that on staff that have time to do that. You have to hire someone. They're expensive to source. And this is really the basis of the SWAP program. Is great. You have these grants, but winners and losers. You have. I found I got a lot of grants when I was supervisor. I found it was more expensive to actually administer them than it was to go actually source them and apply for them. And so, you know, I think that anything that they can do to help have a one-stop shop, I think would be a great step towards an efficiency.
Great. How about counties, Steve? Counties?
I couldn't agree more with my peers here. The statewide clearinghouse would be a wonderful idea. We all struggle. We most of the counties, probably all of them, don't have dedicated grant writers. We just don't have capacity to do that. There are so many grants that are available by the federal government, by the state government, in many different agencies, and we need help with navigating those opportunities. So let's hope we can get this done as well.
Great. So these are some of the low-hanging fruit that all of us, all three associations and our staffs are all working on as we continue the 2026 legislative session. To close this out, what's one thing you want listeners to understand about local governments that they might not realize? Barb.
That's a great question, Mark. I guess what I think about most often, particularly in this day and age where we have so much fragmentation, we have so much polarization in the political space, if you will, that our local leaders are continuing to work together because they have to. We don't have the luxury, maybe that's not the right word, but government can't shut down at the local level. We have to pave the roads, we have to make the lights run and that the water is still running. So I'm not suggesting everyone's sitting around singing Kumbaya every day, but we continue to work together at the local level because we have to do that. We have to make sure that the services that we provide in the counties, cities, towns, and villages continue to be provided so that our residents can live comfortably and have a good quality of life.
Great. Steve, local governments, what do people not understand?
Well, I think that I'd like to build off what Barb mentioned here, the bipartisan nature of our associations, all three of ours. We are not a partisan organization. We represent Republicans and Democrats and all other parties that are in the local government. So it's a unified approach. And the one thing I would like to say to the listeners is what they may not know is New York counties pay more than all the counties across the United States in Medicaid. The $7 billion plus that the New York counties have to pay into this Medicaid program is more than all those other states combined. So I think for us, the number one priority here will be to avoid any federal cost shifts in child care funding, which is frozen right now, or these other safety net programs, human services. We recall what happened with food insecurity that was frozen in October. So these federal cost shifts are a great concern to the counties right now, and then preservation of the state's commitment to Medicaid.
Great. And Chris, what do people may not understand about towns or local governments today?
Well, first I want to say a great podcast. You always walk away with something you learned, right? And I just learned something right here by my friend Steve. That Medicaid thing is astonishing. But, you know, I think when you think about local government, there's a lot of things that folks don't know about it. It seems to be that thing that's just there to make things happen and no one understands exactly how or why it happens. I agree with Barb. I agree with Steve. You know, it's bipartisan. The amount of work that's done together, what you're seeing here is the levels come together. That's happening every day in every community out across the state where these folks are coming together to deliver these critical services. You know, how hard these employees work on a municipal level, I think, is also something that goes unnoticed. So often people, you know, you turn on your water and clean water comes out, that's a local government. You get on a road, most of your roads you're on, and it's safe and passable, that's a local government. Your road is a snowstorm, it's plowed, it's safe to travel, that's a local government. And we can go on and on and on. But, you know, police, EMS now, everything really boils down to how much work these folks do, how hard they work, and how much they work together across the different units. It used to bother me when a former governor used to talk about all the different units of government, right? And, you know, and then people started saying, why do we need all these different levels? They all do something a little bit different, but we all do things together. And I think that's what's important, and I think that's the story, the success story of New York.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for joining us and for walking through these very critical issues facing all of our governments today. Again, these aren't abstract problems. These are real challenges impacting roads, water systems, staffing, and services in every community across New York. We'll be watching closely as the 2026 legislative session gets underway, and we'll be meeting all three associations will be meeting with state leaders next week in our municipal association day. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.